What if the very mercy you're proud of is the blade that's been cutting you down this whole time? What if the reason you keep losing ground isn't because you lack strength, intelligence, or discipline, but because you hesitate at the exact moment life demands cold action? Most men don't fall because they're weak. They fall because they're gentle in a world that interprets gentleness as permission. They absorb disrespect to keep the room calm. They forgive betrayal to protect their self-image. They give endlessly, not because it's noble, but because confrontation scares them more than loss. And they call that virtue. But look closer. That isn't virtue. That's fear wearing clean clothes. Fear of being judged. Fear of being rejected. Fear of being labeled harsh, cruel, or unkind. The truth most people won't say out loud is this: the world doesn't reward goodness. It tests it. It presses against it. And when it finds no resistance, it exploits it. Softness doesn't disarm wolves. It attracts them. This is what most men misunderstand about ruthlessness. They think it's about destruction, domination, or anger. It's none of that. Ruthlessness is clarity under pressure. It's the ability to decide without shaking, to end what must end without apologizing for the noise it makes. It's not emotional. It's surgical. Like a surgeon cutting away infected tissue, not out of hatred, but to save the body. Delay doesn't make the cut kinder. It just lets the rot spread. Think about how many times you knew something had to stop, but you let it continue anyway. A relationship that drained you. A dynamic built on guilt. A pattern of disrespect disguised as humor. Every time you stayed silent, you didn't keep the peace. You taught the world where the line was missing. Each compromise felt small in the moment, but together they formed a slow execution. Not dramatic, quiet, polite, invisible. Here's the brutal law most people avoid. Uncontrolled kindness is not morality. It's vulnerability pretending to be ethics. People rarely destroy you through force. They do it through obligation, through guilt, through labels like selfish or cold, the moment you stop serving their comfort. The weak never take your energy by stealing it. They make you hand it over proudly, convinced you're doing the right thing. The ruthless man sees through this illusion. He understands that mercy without measure builds a world that feeds on him. He knows you cannot protect what matters by rewarding what corrodes it. You cannot create peace by enabling chaos. So he cuts early, cleanly, without drama. Not because he enjoys it, but because delay would cost more. This is the paradox. The ruthless don't hate. They decide. They don't shout. They enforce. They don't beg to be understood. They move in silence and let outcomes speak. To outsiders, it looks cold. To those who understand power, it looks inevitable. Like winter, like gravity, like consequences finally arriving. And here's the part that should unsettle you. The kindest people you know are often the most exhausted. They carry everyone's weight and receive no loyalty in return. They confuse martyrdom with meaning. They bleed to prove goodness. The ruthless never do. They protect their energy the way a king guards his gold. Every act of generosity is deliberate, earned, measured. Because kindness without limits isn't compassion, it's self-betrayal. So ask yourself this, honestly. How much of your life has been spent trying to be understood by people who benefit from your confusion? How many explanations did you give to those who never intended to respect them? The moment you stop explaining is the moment your strength begins. Because the first step toward power is not becoming cruel to others. It's refusing to keep executing yourself. Cruelty has always been misunderstood because most people only recognize it in its ugliest form. They see rage, vengeance, chaos, and assume that's what strength looks like. But real cruelty, the kind that preserves rather than destroys, is quiet. It's discipline applied without emotion. It's the willingness to inflict short-term pain to prevent long-term collapse. The weak call this evil because they confuse discomfort with injustice. The wise recognize it as structure. Look at nature for a moment. The lion does not apologize for the hunt. The storm does not hesitate because one tree is fragile. What is weak breaks. What is strong adapts. Only humans drowning in sentimentality call this cruelty. Necessary endings are not moral failures, they are corrections. And every time you refuse to confront what must end, you don't create kindness, you create rot. Rot spreads quietly until it consumes everything worth saving. In life, the refusal to be firm has consequences. In business, leaders who avoid firing the incompetent eventually lose the competent. In relationships, those who fear confrontation become invisible. In groups, the man who tolerates disrespect teaches everyone else how to treat him. The refusal to be cruel when required is not virtue. It is negligence. It is compassion without responsibility. And responsibility is the foundation of authority. This is why ruthlessness must be cold. Anger makes men sloppy. Emotion makes them predictable. True ruthlessness is stillness. It's the ability to observe without reacting, decide without rushing, and act without explaining. The moment you shout, you've already lost control. Noise is the language of insecurity. Precision belongs to those who are calm. There is a difference between the savage and the strategist. The savage lashes out because he feels threatened. The strategist acts because he has calculated the cost. One destroys blindly, the other enforces order. When a boundary is crossed, the strategist doesn't threaten or negotiate. He delivers consequence so clearly that the line is never tested again. People don't respect kindness. They respect consequence. Not because they're evil, but because certainty makes the world feel stable. Understand this. People value what they fear losing. If you are endlessly patient, endlessly forgiving, endlessly tolerant, your limits become imaginary. Others assume you will always bend. Necessary cruelty reintroduces gravity into their world. It reminds them that your tolerance is a choice, not an obligation. Cruelty without purpose is tyranny, but cruelty with intent is strength. It's how civilizations survive, how empires maintain order, how individuals protect their sanity. This is not about revenge. Revenge is emotional. It keeps you chained to the offender. Ruthlessness is about restoration. Every decisive act sends a signal. I am not endlessly available. I am not afraid to walk away. I am not dependent on your approval. And here's the truth most men avoid. This level of ruthlessness demands mastery of the self before mastery of others. You cannot enforce boundaries if you're addicted to being liked. You cannot deliver consequence if you're afraid of conflict. And you cannot be respected if your emotional state is easy to manipulate. The ruthless man understands that control begins internally. Control of his reactions, his time, his energy, his attention. Every empire that collapsed did so because its leader lost control of one of these. Power does not begin with dominance. It begins with restraint, with the discipline to not react when provoked, to not explain when challenged, to not chase when ignored. This restraint creates an aura that unsettles people, not because it's aggressive, but because it's unreadable. Calm makes others nervous when they sense calculation behind it. Ruthlessness, at its core, is clarity enforced through discipline. It's the spine that keeps kindness from becoming a leash. And until you develop it, no amount of morality will protect you in a world that tests limits before it honors intentions. There are three silent pillars behind every form of real power, and most people fail because they ignore all three: perception, distance, consequence. Miss even one, and whatever authority you think you have collapses the moment it's tested. Perception comes first because people don't act on truth. They act on what they believe. Your reputation, your tone, your boundaries, these shape reality long before facts ever enter the room. If you are perceived as indecisive, you will be treated like a suggestion. If you are perceived as steady and unyielding, people move carefully around you, not because they fear you, but because uncertainty makes them cautious. And caution is respect in its earliest form. The ruthless man understands this. He never reacts too fast. He never over-explains. He never reveals his full intentions. He lets mystery do the heavy lifting. While others rush to clarify, he allows silence to grow uncomfortable. That discomfort forces people to project their assumptions onto him, and most assume strength when faced with calm restraint. His power grows not through intimidation, but through unreadability. Distance is the second pillar, and it's where most men destroy their value. When you are always available, you lose gravity. When you give without limit, you become background noise. The more accessible you are, the less you're respected. This isn't cruelty, it's human psychology. Scarcity creates weight. Distance creates curiosity, and curiosity creates influence. The ruthless maintain distance not because they dislike people, but because proximity without permission erodes authority. They don't let everyone close. They don't broadcast pain or ambition. They don't explain themselves to those who haven't earned context. Their distance creates space, and in that space, others begin to adjust. They speak more carefully. They hesitate. They sense that access is conditional, that access can be withdrawn. Then comes consequence, the final pillar, and the one that turns perception and distance into real control. Power only exists where consequence is certain. If your boundaries have no teeth, your words mean nothing. Empty warnings teach people that limits are optional. The ruthless understand this and enforce standards quietly, consistently, and without apology. Once people see that your no is final, your silence is dangerous, and your absence is permanent, they begin policing themselves around you. This is real authority. Not force, but anticipation. Not domination, but inevitability. You don't chase loyalty. You create it by establishing cost. You don't demand respect. You design conditions where disrespect feels expensive. And this is why fear and love are often misunderstood. Fear doesn't mean terror. It means certainty. It means people know exactly what happens if they cross a line. Discipline is what makes this possible. The man who cannot control his impulses will never control outcomes. Emotion is noise. It distorts judgment. The ruthless man observes the board from above the storm. He asks different questions. If I act now, what does it cost? If I wait, what does it gain? If I lose this, what remains? This detachment turns chaos into opportunity. Most people confuse humility with shrinking. They think being harmless makes them virtuous. But humility without strength is invisibility. The ruthless are not loud, yet their presence is felt. Their calm unsettles because it suggests foresight, calculation, control. They don't try to please because seeking approval hands power away. They don't explain endlessly because explanation implies weakness. And here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't respect goodness alone. They respect structure. They respect boundaries that hold under pressure. They respect men who don't flinch. The moment you stop trying to be harmless, your energy changes. The room senses it. Conversations shift. People adjust their posture around you. Power is not loud. It is consistent. It is disciplined. And it is built quietly by men who understand that control is not about what you take, but what you refuse to give away. Attachment is the silent weakness behind almost every loss of power. Attachment to approval. Attachment to comfort. Attachment to people who drain more than they give. Most men don't realize this because attachment disguises itself as loyalty, empathy, or morality. But in reality, attachment is a leash, and whoever holds it controls your movement. The ruthless man breaks this leash early, not because he is cold, but because he understands a simple truth. The moment your peace depends on something outside you, you are already conquered. One insult can ruin your day. One rejection can shake your confidence. One person's silence can make you doubt your worth. That is not sensitivity. That is dependency. And dependency is the opposite of power. Detachment is what frees the mind. It allows you to feel without folding, to care without clinging, to desire without needing. This is where most people misunderstand ruthlessness. They think it means aggression. It doesn't. True ruthlessness is inner freedom. It is the ability to walk away from anything that no longer serves your purpose, without drama, without justification, without resentment. When you detach, something profound happens. Your reactions slow down. Your decisions sharpen. You stop negotiating with weakness, both yours and others. You no longer seek fairness from a world that respects leverage, not intentions. And this is where real confidence is born. Not from praise, not from possessions, but from knowing that nothing you have owns you. The ruthless man does not fear loss, because loss no longer threatens his identity. He knows who he is without applause, without validation, without reassurance. That's why his silence carries weight. People sense that he does not chase, does not beg, does not depend, and instinctively they adjust. Some feel uneasy, some feel respect, but none feel entitled to him. This level of detachment creates an aura that cannot be faked. It is felt immediately. Your presence becomes commanding not because you demand attention, but because you don't need it. Your calm becomes unsettling because it signals self-command, and self-command is the foundation of every other form of authority. Now here's where strategy enters. Detachment is not withdrawal from life. It is mastery within it. It allows you to see the board clearly while others are trapped inside emotion. This is why the ruthless think in terms of timing, not impulse. They don't strike at the first opportunity. They wait. They observe patterns. They let others reveal themselves. Most people play checkers. They react. They respond. They move based on emotion and urgency. The ruthless play chess. They anticipate. They understand that the impatient man burns bridges he could have crossed later, while the fearful man never moves at all. The strategist studies terrain, habits, blind spots. Then, when the moment is right, he acts once and ends the game. This requires emotional distance. You cannot calculate clearly if pride, anger, or desperation is driving you. Emotion narrows vision. Detachment expands it. The ruthless man steps outside the storm and watches it from above. He asks, "If I act now, what does it cost? If I wait, what does it reveal? If I lose this, what do I gain in clarity?" Even compassion becomes power when used strategically. A well-timed act of mercy can create loyalty where force would fail, but mercy loses all value when it's free. The ruthless understand that every action, kind or cruel, must serve the same master. Control. Control of perception. Control of outcome. Control of self. Once you detach, predictability dies. And unpredictability is dangerous, not chaotic, but calculated. People can't box you in. They can't press the same buttons. They hesitate, and hesitation is power in its purest form. Here is the final truth most men never confront. Ruthlessness is not chaos. It is structure. It is order imposed on instinct. It is the architecture of power built patiently through restraint, timing, and self-command. And at the center of that structure is a single decision that quietly rewrites your life. The decision to stop needing approval. Most weakness traces back to one addiction. Not fear, not laziness. Approval. The hunger to be seen as good, to be understood, to be liked. This addiction makes men explain themselves to people who never earned context, tolerate disrespect to preserve harmony, and remain loyal to situations that slowly drain their spirit. They call it maturity. They call it kindness. But in truth, it is obedience disguised as virtue. The ruthless man ends this addiction without drama, not because he lacks empathy, but because he understands that empathy without control becomes self-destruction. He stops trying to convince others of his value. He stops seeking permission to exist as he is. He realizes something that changes everything. The world does not reward moral intention. It responds to demonstrate its strength. This is where the mask enters. Not a mask of deception, but of discipline. To the outside world, he appears calm, reasonable, even humane. Inside, his mind is cold, clear, and unattached. He separates appearance from intent. He understands that people don't need access to his thoughts, only to the consequences of his decisions. Transparency, when unearned, is exposure. Mystery, when controlled, is leverage. The ruthless learn to appear merciful without being soft, approachable without being accessible, human without being manipulable. This balance is rare, and it is why so few ever hold lasting power. Idealists exhaust themselves trying to prove they are good. Strategists let others believe it while quietly securing position. While the crowd is distracted by morality, the disciplined man builds inevitability. Over time, something unsettling happens. The performance becomes reality. The practiced calm becomes real calm. The controlled silence becomes natural authority. The man who once had to restrain himself no longer feels the urge to react. Pretending to be unshaken turns into being unshaken. The mask becomes armor, then identity, then instinct. But here lies the danger. Power without reflection decays into tyranny. That is why the ruthless must master solitude as much as strategy, not to feel guilt, but to remember direction. To remember that the purpose of ruthlessness is not domination over others, but sovereignty over the self. Without this balance, strength rots into cruelty, and cruelty eventually collapses under its own weight. This is the awakening few reach. Ruthlessness is not about harming others. It is about refusing to keep harming yourself through hesitation, through endless tolerance, through misplaced mercy. It is the discipline to decide without trembling, to act without emotional debt, to walk away without apology. Men who appear purely good are devoured. Men who appear purely ruthless are resisted. But the man who wears humanity over a mind of steel moves freely through both worlds. He is patient without being weak, kind without being naive, cold without being cruel. He understands that power is not maintained by constant action, but by selective action. He does not rush. He does not beg. He does not explain himself to those who test his limits. He observes. He decides. He enforces. And when he finally moves, it is not loud. It is not emotional. It is not chaotic. It is inevitable. That inevitability is what people feel when they sense a man who cannot be pressured, cannot be rushed, cannot be controlled. A man whose boundaries do not bend under discomfort. A man whose silence carries more weight than most people's arguments. This is not a call to abandon your humanity. It is a call to protect it, to stop offering your softness to a world that only respects structure, to become dangerous not in violence, but in clarity. Because in the end, the most powerful man in the room is not the one who dominates others, but the one who has mastered himself.